Well, here we are in week 5 of the course, and well, there's a lot to say, and it's all very dramatic, I think. We're reading Darwin. We're basically taking a look into Darwin, who was not a philosopher, right? He was a scientist, he was a biologist, he was a naturalist. But, if we look back into the 19th century, there are these thinkers who emerged, who, in a certain respect, taught us what it meant to be modern people. Those are thinkers like Karl Marx. And if we sort of extend it into the early 20th century, thinkers like Freud and others too, but maybe those are the most prominent, who in a certain way changed the rules or established the new ground on which we would think about ourselves and the world. The 19th century into the 20th century was a time of revolution in the way that we thought about ourselves and the world. A revolution that we're still getting used to in a certain way, almost a century later. Certainly the developments of modern physics, theory of relativity, quantum physics, the notion of the Big Bang and the very universe itself having an origin. These were ideas that were so fundamentally different and radical that in a certain respect we're still catching up in our consciousness to what their implications really are. And there could be other ideas I could mention too, but certainly there's no idea that cuts closer to the bone, that hits closer to home in terms of being revolutionary in how human beings think about themselves in particular than Darwin's thought. We are still dealing with it. It has, of course, completely shaped modern biology. I mean, no one can really deny the fundamental soundness of the theory of evolution itself. Now, in the details of it, people argue, and they should argue, and there are difficulties. But more or less, modern biology it takes Darwin for granted. Of course, he was right. It's really only in America that Darwin is still controversial, that there are still people who are radically opposed to Darwinism. But that's because we have a very strange history in our country, and we have But those people who oppose Darwin have very good reason, probably, for opposing Darwin, at least because Darwin threatens their values. And Darwin always threatened people's values. Darwin was controversial from the beginning, because even before he mentioned the implications or began to explore the implications of his theory of evolution by natural selection for human nature, because the first book, the 1859 book, The Origin of Species, almost doesn't mention human beings at all, because it's a general theory of biology. It's a general theory of nature, living things. But it was in this book, 1870, The Descent of Man, we're reading the last chapter, that he tried to specifically to apply the theory to human beings. But even before that, people saw its implications right away in 1859. That is, theological implications, you might say, the implications for how human beings think of themselves. And there were all sorts of specific questions that were raised or specific claims that were made. But the most general one is, how do we view ourselves as purely natural beings? That is, Darwin provided a theory that coherently and convincingly accounted for the shape of living things, including human beings, as being the result of purely natural forces. We are a certain species, we Homo sapiens, and we evolved from earlier species. And the different features that we have can be accounted for by being adaptations that occurred in the prehistory of the species. We are natural creatures. We are who we are, but we got here in the shape that we did as a result of pretty much blind chance. The laws of nature are working in strange conditions to produce creatures like us. But this general idea of human beings as natural creatures obviously has great philosophical relevance, and it relates to the first of our questions, our guiding questions. Again, what am I? What can I know, and what can I hope for? Perhaps Darwin has implications for all three of those questions, but especially for the first question, what am I? You are an animal. You are an animal. And of course, you're a unique animal. But as a student wrote many years ago in a paper from my class, yes, the human species is unique, but there's nothing unique about being unique. All species are different. It may be that the human species is a more remarkable species than the general run of species, but it's just a species. It is maybe a fairly simple statement that human beings are essentially animals, that they are essentially natural creatures, but it does run against the self-conception that human beings have had pretty much forever about themselves, that they are special. And in the Western tradition, there's no more influential text than the book of Genesis in the Bible, which is the most famous, again, in the Western tradition, the most famous account of the origin of human beings, which of course is one of special creation by God and having this special status within nature because of their special relationship with God. Darwin found a way to explain the origins of human beings in a completely naturalistic, scientific, non-supernatural way, which again still offends a lot of people. And maybe it is offensive. That's for you to decide. But this week, this fifth week, as we move to the end of the course, is really a meditation on the basic Darwinian message that human beings are, and this would be the answer to that question, what am I? What are human beings? Human beings are animals that evolved according to the chance forces of evolution by way of natural selection.